Hello and welcome to Insight here on Zodiak. I'm your usual host, Teresa Temweka Ndanga. The Public Affairs Committee has been central to civil society work in Malawi. The body has even represented Malawians by negotiating with government on the needs of Malawians. But how far have the negotiations gone? Is it making any progress? And is the body itself impactful? My guest in the program today is spokesperson for the religious affiliated body Public Affairs Committee, and this is Father Peter Mulomole. Glad that you could make it.
Thank you, Teresa. So
let's start by discussing what else does PAC do apart from what now you're well known of, the all-inclusive conferences. Tell me about your work.
Well, in our constitution, PAC is supposed to do advocacy, civic education, but also mediation. Of course, as you are saying, we are known by the all-inclusive conference, but that's just part of our work. If you remember in the tripartite elections, during the mayhem, we had a group of religious leaders who went around to the parties, and tried to negotiate the situation. That is mediation, it is not advocacy or lobbying. And we're also supposed to do civic education. We're normally doing voter education, but actually even between elections, we're supposed to civic educate people so that they know what democracy is all about and their freedoms and their responsibilities. But sometimes because of lack of funds, we don't. Yes, Teresa.
So advocacy, mediation, civic education. So as of now, in the current administration, under President Peter Mutharika, what has your work focused on? Is it more of advocacy, more of civic education?
It has been more of advocacy. You remember, we had that issue of federalism, which we we kind of facilitated. We're a catalyst. And also the February 2016 all-inclusive conference. So it has been more on really after the elections. During the elections, we were involved in civic education throughout the nation.
Right.
But after the elections, I think we should say, sadly, we have concentrated on, let's say, advocacy and lobbying, and not very much on mediation. Mediation also was during the election as such. So mainly we have done the federalism and also the all-inclusive conference last February.
Right. Before we go to the all-inclusive conferences, on federalism, would you say you were successful?
Yes, because we had a mandate. The mandate was to find out, what people thought about federalism. So we did it on national level as well as on the regional level, and we tried to get the feelings of people about it. And basically, we discovered that really people, the majority felt sidelined by the administration, so to speak, and they were crying for inclusion. Okay. And therefore, to that extent, I think we succeeded. That we allowed people to articulate their feelings, and then we recorded them. We said, this is our findings, and we presented them at the national forum as well. That was our mandate. Yeah.
But thereafter, did anything happen?
Thereafter, not so much, because, as I said, people were saying federalism, yes, perhaps later, but now let's work on the system that we have. All right, because there are some loopholes in this system that are perhaps contributing to people being sidelined. So could we perfect the system we have and work on the electoral system, okay, which I think the Special Commission or Law Commission is doing right now, and maybe it will see the light of the day when it reaches Parliament and the President has considered to it. And there were also issues to do, for example, with sharing of power. That, for example, the people appointed at the cabinet, they thought it was really weighing too much towards the South, where the head of state comes from, and they had hoped that perhaps it would have been more balanced, with also gender sensitivity in that. That has not happened. so significantly, as you can see. But there are also other issues that, for example, they're talking about. There should be some kind of national vision, which isn't there. That's maybe development they thought was swayed towards one region, okay, and they were referring to the South, most of them. And I think the government is also working on what they call the National Commission, so that we can come up with a vision where not every government that comes in should bring their own initiatives, and then they're abandoned by the foreign government. Right. So some issues really are being worked on, others not so much, because actually they don't depend on PARC as PARC. We articulate them, and some players have to come in and implement them. So some players are more interested than others, of course.
So would you say largely today the feeling on the street or the feeling out there would still be that some people would feel excluded?
Yes, they do. I mean, you have heard of members of parliament from the north forming their own lobbying group, to lobby government on inclusion. So it's a clear indication that people still feel, excluded. And until we work on those suggestions that the regional as well as national fora suggested before 2019, people still feel excluded. And this is where we are supposed to do. We are supposed to work on those suggestions because I think in a democracy, people's voice should be taken very seriously because after all, power belongs to them, the government is theirs, they just entrust it to one group today, another group tomorrow.
Talking about an example that you've just given, where MPs from the northern region form their own group to lobby for development and so forth, wouldn't you say that is deepening divisions in the country if people start forming groups depending on where someone is from?
You're right, but I think the best question we have to ask is why are people driven to do what they do and to say what they say? Okay, and I think that's what we have been doing as PARC to find out. And I think we came up with issues that were people's concern. Because what is happening, be it in the north, center, or south, it's just a symptom. It's just, the real reason why they are doing it is the reason that we got when we went around the country and lobbied and solicited for ideas. So perhaps they're feeling that their views and suggestions and recommendations are not still taken seriously, and that's why they do what they do. But of course, the act itself, of course, the advisory, but sometimes we drive people to a corner between the hard rock and what else, and they behave the way they do. But we have to ask ourselves, why have they been, driven to this corner here? And you find out we didn't do ABC in the first place.
And talking about divisions, there has been a view going to the all-inclusive conferences that these conferences only further divisions between opposition and government or the citizenry and government. Tell me about the idea behind the all-inclusive conferences in the first place. What was the idea? And do you think that today you are still serving that purpose?
Well, thank you very much, Teresa. You see, PARC is Public Affairs Committee, so it is issues to be with the public. And there was a time when PARC board would sit down and write, for example, press statements about what was happening in the country. And the question was, okay, where did you take this? Who told you these were the issues that matter in the nation, right? So we said, okay, maybe they're right. Now let's consult. So that was the birth of the all-inclusive conferences. First of all, formerly they were called political roundtables. They have been there. It's only the name that has changed. But the idea was to consult before PARC spoke. Because if it's public affairs that we speak on, then I think the public has a right to have an input in what we say. We must do some kind of research. So those 2 days we spend there is to listen to people. And then we come back as board and say, I think we have heard the issues. And I think we have heard what people are saying. Maybe let's say this and that. We think this will be more relevant and they will own it. So that's the idea. Now to your second question about, do you think they're still relevant? Yes, they are still relevant. I mean, PAC, we say, is the voice of the voiceless, is the conscience of the nation. And I don't think we can do otherwise than to listen to people we represent. Otherwise, we'll be like some members of parliament who say, my people have sent me, but actually they haven't consulted the people. We, as PAC, we should consult the people. We know, as religious leaders, we are always with the people. But it's good that we let people speak. And we hope when we are at Mount Sochi or wherever and meet all those gurus, those leaders of opinion in their sectors, we hope we are listening to the people themselves. Of course, this is another accusation that has been leveled on us, that you listen to the elites and not to the real people you represent. But we hope that those people speak for the ones we represent.
And that takes me to my next question, that when you say these are views of the people, the general public's view, you're only talking about mostly people who are already in positions, people who already have a platform. Some of them are members of parliament who can speak in parliament. Some of them are leaders of political parties. They have a voice, they have a platform through which they can speak. So whose voice is PAC representing?
Yeah, if those people, for example, members of parliament, are not speaking on behalf of the people, if they don't know their people, then there must be something wrong with the system. Because these are people who are put in the position by the people, by the general public referring to. So we expect that as member of parliament, they go back time and again and refresh their memories and review the whatever. So when they speak on behalf of the people. But if they don't speak on behalf of the people, then we should say the system is wrong. And these other also stakeholders that we consult, they have networks, I think, up to the grassroots level, and we ourselves too have networks at the grassroots level. But it's just like that we would like to hear different views from the media, for example, from the academia, and from the private sector, from government itself, politicians and all that, that we hear them together. We give them a kind of safe, space. Because otherwise we're always shouting at each other and not talking to each other. So we give them a forum where they could feel safe to express their views according to the area they come from. So we feel, I think that forum is fulfilling its duty. And we hope that these people really, when we meet them, they are representing the people they say they do. But of course, you are also partly right that as PAC, we should also have initiative to go direct to the people themselves at grassroots and say, is what your leader is saying really representing what you feel? And once in a while, just to check on facts. It's also true.
Okay. Talk to me further about participants to such conferences. We seem to have opposition political parties taking advantage of these meetings to voice their concerns. And the last meeting, there was a call that President Peter Mutharika, a strong call rather, coming from opposition political parties or representatives, that he should resign. And do you feel that opposition political parties especially would take advantage of this platform?
Both opposition and government, they take advantage of this conference, of this forum, okay? It's only that the opposition, sometimes they make calls that attract attention from the nation, all right? But all of them, when we go in there, every group, I think, has got some kind of private agenda, okay, and they take advantage of that forum to express themselves. But what we are saying is, let's listen to each other. Even though what they say is outrageous, okay, let's listen to it, because it's important that you know what your opponent is thinking about. We Malawians are afraid of coming in the open and discuss issues as we are doing, Teresa, here. We prefer to discuss behind each other's back and not looking at each other's face and into their eyes and speak what you say. So that forum is to provide that safe space I was talking about. Yes, sometimes the opposition takes advantage, but other times also the government takes advantage. But you remember there are also other sectors there. There is the academia, private sector, whatever. So it's not a forum we provide for government and opposition. It's a forum we provide for the nation as such.
And why is it then that governments all parties that have been in government, DPP during the Bingu Mutharika administration, didn't like the all-inclusive conferences. Joyce Banda, of course, not overly critical, but she also didn't particularly like the all-inclusive conferences. The same thing with the current president, Professor Peter Mutharika. He doesn't seem to really like the all-inclusive conferences.
Actually, the issue is not liking the all-inclusive conferences. Actually, is not liking PAC. Okay, because PAC is a group of faith leaders, and they address people's consciences like the prophets of the Old Testament, and they speak truth to power, right? And it's the truth that we speak about, and we often don't like the truth. So the all-inclusive conference is just one forum. It's an approach, but basically, when really they are firing the missiles at PAC. That we don't like PAC. Okay, even before the all-inclusive conferences, they did not like PAC. Be it the government or sometimes even the opposition, because we don't like the truth. What we are trying to say here is, I think they don't have to like PAC, because sometimes what we say and do are not likable. Okay, because we point out sometimes on weaknesses. And normally, people don't like other people to point out our weaknesses. We want them to point out our strength. But PAC is not just there to please people. It is there to be conscious of society. And we remind those in government, but also sometimes those in opposition, that they have a duty, because what they are holding is a trust. People entrusted that authority to them. It belongs to the people themselves. And sometimes they make promises. Like, for example, the present administration. You go to the manifesto, and it's full of beautiful promises. If they could only fulfill 1/3 of them, Malawi would have been a different nation altogether. So we remind them, so this is what you promised. How far have we gone? And people don't like to be reminded on promises that perhaps they are sadly unable to fulfill.
Right. So how do you take that if you know that governments don't like PAC? Are you comfortable with that position where a government that you're supposed to be working with, essentially, by representing the voices that do not have a voice or do not have a platform? So are you comfortable being in a relationship where one side does not particularly like you?
Yes, very comfortable as religious leaders. As I said, I was quoting you the prophets of old. I mean, the kings, the queens they were addressing didn't like them. But there are some who, even without liking them, they listen to them. We cannot like each other all the time, all right? But it's good to listen to each other. Listen to even to your enemy. Maybe sometimes it's your best friend. I mean, if you listen to what they say, and it's true, and it's true, the best you can do is to address it, even if you address it silently. But to say we don't want people we don't like, people who don't speak the way we want them to speak, and then we don't want opposition at all. I mean, you are killing life, because life is full of tension, friction, even within yourself. Sometimes you contradict, you question yourself. So, let's be open to dialogue. We don't have to like people, but we can love each other without liking each other. And yes, listen to the points. Are these points they're talking about making sense? Are these national issues what they're addressing? Are these points that matter to people? It doesn't matter who the messenger is. You don't kill the messenger because you don't like the message.
Right. And talking about dialogue, PAC after the February 2016 now,
yes,
all-inclusive conference,
yeah.
You did start talking to government on the issues that were raised at that conference.
Sure.
Talk to me about the progress so far of that dialogue with government.
You see, that dialogue actually was born out of necessity, because our role, our mandate was, after the conference, was supposed to present the recommendations, which we even digested further, because it was not just the recommendations that we presented, but also within the recommendations, issues and actionable resolutions in there. So we didn't want to be blamed of saying, PAC is so always vocal, giving general recommendations, So we sat down with experts in their areas, in health, in politics, in economics, and say, how can we break these general recommendations to actionable, so that the government maybe, if they adopted them, could be heard. And that's what we did. So our, mandate when we met the president that April, famous 21st of April, when we met him was to present the recommendations to him. But as we were dialoguing, if I may call it dialogue, okay, we discovered that perhaps there were some areas that the head of state found nonsensical or not practical, or what did you mean here? So the board chair said, okay, Mr. President, is it possible that you give us a technical team and they meet our technical team, and then maybe we can explain what we meant by some of these problematic areas. So it was for clarification of the recommendations here. But that dialogue collapsed, as everybody knows by now. It did not take place. We met only once to frame the roadmap, procedures, and protocol. After that, that was the first and last meeting that we had.
So what's the future for PAC? I mean, is it a waste? Was that meeting a waste? Is the document a waste?
No, it was not a waste, because the issues that we talked about, we addressed, are so pertinent today. The economy is still not doing very well. Politics is still in jungle, wilderness right now. We have all just talked about groups now grouping themselves on the regional levels to attract attention and call for inclusion. And you know what is happening in health. You know what is happening in agriculture right now. Right now we are living on donors' mercy, because most of the people in the villages, about 8 million of them, are living on handouts, on donations from the donors. So we cannot say the issues now are dead and buried. Let's forget about it and move on. No, we cannot move on. The issues are there. But it's just a way of finding a modality on how do we tackle these issues. We know the government has them through the head of state, and the media also, you have them. Sometimes you refer to them. But the issue is how now do we implement them? Maybe do we have to follow a different approach, perhaps?
Yeah. Because President Mutharika has clearly said that he doesn't like to be given deadlines, and he has complained about the approach that PAC has taken in terms of addressing some of the concerns that Malawians have raised. Would you consider maybe taking a different approach, being more accommodating to the feelings of the president, because he says you should not be commanding him around?
You're right, and I think that's why we had that forum. I mean, that technocrats would meet and explain what we meant, because what the head of state calls deadlines. We're not deadlines. We're not ultimatums. Okay, those were time frames, milestones. When you're doing something, you must put in somewhere, indicators that there is progress or not. So could we say by this we can meet and look at what has happened? Is this really what we wanted? Is everywhere. I mean, anyone who knows administration, all right, and somebody who's done programming, you have to put in there for the sake of evaluation, monitoring and evaluation. You cannot just say, here's a blank check. Okay, we give you authority for 5 years. We don't care how you spend it. After 5 years, we'll come back. No, I mean, you must have some kind of milestones. And that's all we did. They're not ultimatum that, Mr. President, do this. If you don't do it, I mean, who are we? We don't have parliament. We don't have judiciary. We don't have police. We don't have army. Who is PAC to do that to the head of state? No, we can never do that, okay? Because we know our mandate very well. We know. We are religious leaders. We are prophets. We have a prophetic voice. All we do is to urge, those who have power to use their power rightly. And all we are saying here, as using our power, let's meet and monitor and evaluate what is happening. And if that is an ultimatum, then I think I have to go back to school and be educated on what an ultimatum is.
So, having worked with the different governments that the all-inclusive conferences have been there for quite some time now, would you say in the current administration this has been the most difficult one to get the concerns or the recommendations to government?
Yeah, I think to get a listening ear, okay, I think for me, this is one of the most difficult administrations I've made, because I think there is a feeling of arrogance. I know they don't like that word. A feeling of, we know it. Say, what can PAC tell us? You are not an elected body, all right? We have other people to consult. So that kind of feeling of entitlement. You know, there is something about power that really I find intriguing. I find very interesting that you have power, and sometimes you just feel that you're on top of the world and there is nobody else. That's why you're there, because you're the best. But that's not how things should be in a democracy. Democracy, especially multi-party democracy. When we accepted it, we accepted also other alternative views. And we also accepted tolerance, listening to each other, even if you don't like each other. And you don't care where a good idea comes from. It can come from the faith community, can come from the opposition, come from the government, private sector, academia. If it's good for the interest of the nation, adopt it. So I would say, to come back to your question, yes, I find the present administration a bit arrogant, even when it comes to sharing information. You remember, we didn't know where the president was after the United Nations assembly for some weeks, the blackout, and they enjoyed it. They just enjoy seeing people groping in the dark, So, yeah, it's been very difficult. We thought that maybe now that they were coming back into government, that learned their lesson. It doesn't look so.
Let's talk quickly about corruption. In your recent statement, you have mentioned that PAC is worried with the levels of corruption in the country and the increased cases of corruption or incidents of corruption. Talk to me about that. Does that insinuate that you're seeing corruption go up in this particular government, or you think that just the continuation of corruption is a worry for you?
It's escalating. It's escalating. That not only this government, but from we cannot say much about the old Malawi Congress Party because nobody was allowed to think or speak. So maybe there was corruption, but we didn't know about it because there was a blackout of information. But it starts from UDF administration up to this government here. We had Mr. Henry Kajaje, who showed us the charts. It's really going up and is alarming to the point that people are losing trust in a future where we will have a corruption-free state of affairs. At first people are saying, yeah, it can change. Today now it seems people are saying, who cares? And that's worrying. It's worrying. Because we don't want it to become a culture. Now it's for many areas, especially they say in the government, private sector now, unfortunately, business community, but they say the media is spared, you are spared, so far. There is some corruption, but not so significant. And also faith community, there is corruption also there, but not so significant, not to raise alarms. But in the other sectors, is on the rise, and that's worrisome for the faith community.
But we have always heard the president say he's following a zero tolerance to corruption policy, and he has always said that he's doing all he can to root out corruption in the country. Are you not appreciative of what the president is doing and his government?
There is a difference between rhetoric and facts on the ground. Okay? Yeah, he says that. And even their manifesto is very clear. It's corruption-free. Zero tolerance to corruption is business unusual. Okay, very impressive, but we have to look at what is happening on the ground. When the president stands up to speak, he's speaking about Cashgate of Joyce Banda, the 24 billion. He hardly speaks about the 236 billion kwacha Cashgate, which also part of it happened in their own former government and in his present government. He never speaks about that. And there's been this maze, gate. All right? And there are allegations, there is perception. If you really are serious about zero tolerance principle, then you do what you're supposed to do. First of all, thanks to him, he came up with a commission of inquiry, all right, which has been heavily criticized, but he came up with that, And of course, there was Mr. Jumbe who was asked to step aside. But people were saying, what about Dr. Japonda, who's Minister of Agriculture and Rural Development? There are, perceptions. We have to manage perceptions. why not asking him, okay, his minister, I say, just step aside for some time. Let them do their work, and later on, we look at the findings. Or change him to another ministry, okay? Just shuffle the cabinet and change him to a lower ministry so that you allow the commission to investigate freely. No. He's still there, even after court injunction, he's still there. So it's the perception that people have. Rhetoric and what happens on the ground. People are saying, this is just talk. They're not walking, they talk. Right. All right? Right? Yeah. So, yes, Teresa, you're right. The president, thank God, speaks a lot about no favor, no fear, but on the ground, that's not what we see. It seems there are sacred cows in Malawi who are above the law, which actually he saw to defend. He saw to defend the Constitution. And some people are breaking the Constitution, and he's there not taking decisions. That's what worries people.
Father Mulomole, we're going towards the end of the program, but I wanted to ask you, what's your hope for the future as PAG for the people of Malawi?
That's a $1 million question. I'm a religious leader. I'm still hopeful, because I believe that nothing is impossible with God. That I believe very strongly. We have come from a past where we came to a situation we thought we could not, there was no way out, and we came out. Malawians are resilient. I just hope that maybe one day we'll have a Donald Trump who really, yeah, we need somebody as crazy as that one to just say to the establishment, enough, let's start all over, because we are recycling leaders. And I don't think, as long as we keep on recycling leaders and having, royal families here in Malawi, much is going to happen. As long as we have, things happening on a regional level, okay, that I choose you, Teresa, because you come from home, not because you merited, you have the ability to do it, but no, at least I can identify with you, okay, and maybe I can get favors from you. As long as we continue this, I don't think anything will happen. As long as we continue first past the post, that even with the 5%, you can ruin Malawi here. I don't think much is going to happen. You just have to work on our electoral reforms very urgently before 2019 and work on those other recommendations that people, if we don't work on them, the status quo remains up to 2019, there is very little hope. But as I said, I'm a religious leader and there is nothing possible with God.
Father Mulomole, thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
My pleasure.